hear me?
Good.
Sir Martin, can you hear me?
I can hear you,
Great.
Jason. As I said, I was a bit chastened. It's early in the morning here in New York, not the sort of thing that you want to wake up to.
Right, excellent. Well, thank you very much for joining us. I'm Jason Karaian from Quartz. This obviously is Sir Martin Sorrell from WPP, formerly Wire and Plastic Products, now the world's largest ad agency, $550 billion industry. We are here, Sir Martin, to talk about the state of play in global advertising business and brands.
I've just got to correct you, Jason.
Okay.
$1 trillion industry.
$1 trillion industry, okay.
Right.
Not according to your forecast that I just pronounced.
Old style advertising, about 500 billion, and about 500 billion in the other stuff that we do, including digital.
Right, okay. Speaking of the other stuff, I want to ask you about fake news, about Facebook and Google are, I think, am I right in saying that those are the two largest, the two platforms that you spend the most of your clients' money on? Mark Zuckerberg.
Just so we get it right, this year Google will be the largest, so they'll account for about 5 billion, 5.5 billion out of 75 billion that we don't spend the money, we invest with our clients or on behalf of our clients. So Google would be number one. Number two would be what I guess is the only truly global media mogul. That's in Rupert Murdoch's Nexus, which would cover Star and Sky and Fox and News Corp. And then third would be Facebook, around 1.7 billion. The Murdoch group would be about 2.25 billion. Facebook would be about 1.7, having been 1 billion last year. Google, say 5.5 versus 4 last year. And the other big media owners are quite similar to Facebook at around 1.7 and go down to about 750 million. So it's highly fragmented, as you can see from that. It's out of a total portfolio of about 75 billion. I would expect next year Facebook to be, if not number 2 next year, probably by 2019.
Right. So speaking of Facebook, fake news, hyper-partisan news, these kinds of things, Mark Zuckerberg said recently that it's a pretty crazy idea that swayed people's opinions in the US election and some of the other votes. Does that mean that advertising on that platform is also perhaps less effective than we think it is? I know you've gone after them, for example, how they measure video and this kind of thing, but talk to me about your concerns about perhaps your clients' messages appearing alongside some of this fake news and the other things that we're seeing on these social platforms.
When one learns that the single biggest fake news story during the election here in the US was the headline, Pope endorses Trump, you get a little bit concerned about that. So having said that, the issues around, Jason, around measurement, the issues around fake news, all these issues have raised serious concerns, and I think amongst our client base, and quite rightly so. You've had Eric Salama on his or Yossi's so-called panel a few minutes ago, and Eric is intimately involved. We've invested in ComScore. We own 20% of ComScore, which was an amalgamation of ComScore and Rentrack, precisely because we wanted to improve the standards of measurement across all media. Now, what this measurement fracas and fake news fracas have brought to everybody's attention is that in many people's view, and certainly in my view for a number of years, Google, Facebook, indeed Snapchat, Twitter, LinkedIn, AOL, all of them are not technology companies. They masquerade as technology companies. They're basically media companies. And there is no way, and far be it from me I'm in no position to go head-to-head with Mark Zuckerberg or criticize or whatever, and let's put that to one side. But there is no way that they can claim to be digital engineers, tightening digital pipes with their digital spanners and not be responsible for the stuff that goes through their pipes. And it's, in my view, outrageous that they would try to disassociate themselves from responsibility for the editorial. You've worked in the media, Jason, you've been in the Economist Group, you've been elsewhere. You know that you take responsibility for what you write. So, for example,
Indeed.
I mean, just give you two examples just in the last 24 hours. Willett Kingston Smith puts out their annual survey. Their numbers are wrong. When their numbers are wrong, we speak to the journalists and we correct them. This morning, a breaking views came out from Thomson Reuters. The numbers are wrong. We talk to them and try and get them to correct their numbers in relation to the industry and indeed in one case in relation to ourselves. So you have to take responsibility, and there is no way that Google and Facebook can disassociate themselves from responsibility. They are media companies. And that's the issue that you just touched on. And this is very important in terms of the balance, a perceived balance between, let's call it old media and new media.
Right.
The old media, the traditional media, take that responsibility, I think, pretty seriously. The new media discharge your responsibility. They're not going to be able to do that.
Right.
They're not going to be able to do it.
To what extent then do ad agencies like WPP and all of its various subsidiaries, who, you know, are some of the main spenders on these platforms, to what extent do you have responsibility for vetting, particularly in like programmatic advertising, where these brand messages appear next to stories about the Pope's love of Donald Trump, etc.?
Well, if we misplace ads, and this applies to traditional media as much as it does to news media,
right,
and the clients have not approved it, or it ends up accidentally against editorial. I mean, there have been situations, many situations, where agencies have placed advertising next to editorial that has been a problem from their point of view. So we take that responsibility pretty seriously. I mean, I guess the question that you're getting round to is, you know, whether we should think more deeply and more seriously about it, and we do. And in an era of purpose-driven marketing, I mean, I don't think there are many, if any, clients that I can think of that don't take purpose, call it social responsibility, whatever. I think purpose is probably the best description. Don't take purpose extremely seriously, and it is front and center in their strategy. Now, talking about it and doing it are two different things, but certainly it's front and center. There's very little greenwashing that goes on today as opposed to 5, 10, 15, 20 years ago. We know that purpose is important to consumers. We know that purpose is important to people inside organizations, or people who are considering joining organizations, or millennials or centennials, however you want to describe it. So this whole area is becoming increasingly important. There's one other thing I just want to say in relation to the question. There is a view, and I heard it last night here in New York, again, put quite forcibly, that new media are part of the reason for their strength is their fashionability.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure I totally agree with that, but I would make the point. You know, Facebook has, I think I'm right in saying, issued 4 corrections. There was one time they issued 1 correction to the denominator on 3-second views, and then there was, I think, 3 other corrections that they issued a few weeks ago. If a traditional media company did that, they probably would be eviscerated. They have not suffered, at least in the short term, from what we can see, a similar punishment. We'll see whether in the longer term. I think what you might see in the new media marketplace is Snapchat certainly is seen by some as a third force. If the AOL, Yahoo, Nexus, Verizon Nexus starts to get some traction, that's a third force. We see our own Xaxis with Nexus as a third force. The traditional media could form together their own third force. But the duopoly of Google and Facebook is extremely strong, and all the issues you just touched on, fake news, measurement in particular, what Keith Weed, as CMO of our second largest client, Unilever, has called the 3 V's, value, viewability, and validation. All those issues have been raised by what you raised in your first question and subsequent questions, and things that we have to take very seriously, because traditional print, as you well know, particularly interestingly, since the beginning of this year, has been under tremendous pressure. We've seen in the UK circulations down 5% in traditional print newspapers, newspaper advertising down 15-20. Last night, I was told by one major group their advertising is down 25%. Subscriptions are up, interestingly, but ad revenues are down. So these are serious issues, and they're existential issues for those media.
Right. Getting back to the point of purpose, I wanted to ask you, when you're working with clients, I think, purpose can be these kind of fundamental human rights type things, but it also veers into politics. And I think with Brexit, Trump, et cetera, one FTSE CEO told me before the Brexit vote that his company's position was that they were passionately neutral about the vote, which seemed kind of mealy-mouthed to me. It seems hard now, I think, for companies to remain neutral on these types of things. And we've seen some companies just like divest from the Daily Mail, and obviously, as you said, trying to get their brands away from fake news and whatnot. I mean, is this something how are you consulting with companies about whether or not they should stick their neck out, so to speak, on political matters, on advertising their purpose, that sort of thing?
Well, just deal with some specifics. I mean, on Brexit, personally, I was a Remainer. When asked by anybody, if you had asked me, I would have said my personal view, and I would underline personal view. We have 17,000 people in the UK. It wasn't my position to either advise them or tell them which way to vote. I think it was our position to say go out and vote, and about, what was it, almost 2/3 of the population voted, but there was a third that didn't. And when you think the margin was 52-48, and that maybe some of the younger people, I remember Vice Chancellor of Oxford University saying they had done a similar campaign to get Oxford graduates to come out to vote, but only about 40-odd% of them actually voted. So clearly, I think there's a responsibility in those sort of situations to say vote. I'm not sure that it would be right for a CEO of a company to say the company express the company's view, but they can express their personal view. On this question about advice, I think the advice would be, don't jump on the bandwagon for the bandwagon's sake. If you have an issue that affects your business because of where you're located, I'm thinking of the transgender bathroom issue in North Carolina, which the Bank of America, for example, took a position on because that's where its headquarters is. That's a community in which they're highly prominent, and therefore they felt it was the right thing to do. That's fine, and I think that is something that is, but it's very difficult. I mean, for example, if you look at what's happening here in the US, Kellogg's have taken a position on Breitbart News.
Right.
They've withdrawn their spending from Breitbart. Now, like it or not, Trump got votes from, 25% or so of the US population. And, if you take a position on something like that, it is 1/4 of the US population has voted for Trump. They're not all Breitbart News people, but everybody has a right to be heard, even if you disagree with what's being said. So I think the answer, Jason, is you have to pick your causes and your purpose carefully and make sure that it is very significant and relevant to what your company does and what you're doing. For example, do I think that free trade, one of the other issues that was on the list of things that you possibly want to touch on, do I think free trade is important for WPP? Yes. So would I be in favor of free trade agreements, whether they're multilaterals or bilaterals? Yes. Does it matter to WPP if there is protectionism? Well, the answer is it's a bit like the curate's egg, because what we lose on the multinational swings, because multinationals are about, let's say, half, 60% of our business, local companies, regional companies are the balance. So we have a sort of 50-50 split approximately between those companies that violently benefit from global free trade and those companies that are not necessarily as affected or advantaged by protectionism, i.e. the local companies. The other thing, of course, is that if the analysts are right, and what Trump means here in the US is a stronger US economy, which I think it does do, certainly in the short to medium term.
Right.
And in the longer, and in the international sphere, outside the US, there'll be some issues, some volatility, whether it's Chinese relationships, a plus maybe with Russia, Mexico question mark, and other countries. That given all that, what you gain on the US swings, you lose on the international roundabouts. It's quite complex, but I think that's an area where we would say we were in favor of free trade. We'd be in agreement with what the president-elect says. You don't enter into agreements that disadvantage you. You enter into agreements that advantage both sides. And if you see trade agreements that disadvantage you, you try and renegotiate, or you say you're not going to be a part of them. So net, I think you pick your causes and you pick your areas and you focus on them in relation to business. You don't come back to where I started. Don't jump on the bandwagon and embrace everything for everything's sake.
Right. So focusing a bit more back onto maybe some of the logistics around advertising, which I think some people here wanted to hear about. Social media ad spending is set to overtake newspapers by the end of this decade, according to some forecasts. Do people want to be friends with brands?
Yes, I think basically they do. I mean,
Really?
we're trying to develop a relationship, and I think the answer is very simply yes. I mean, it depends what those brands stand for, and depends on how those brands are perceived and how they change over time. But yes, I think there's a relationship with brands, and we're in the business of building relationships, those customer relationships with corporate brands, with product brands, with service brands, geographically around the world. So I think, yes, basically people do want to have a relationship, and they take pride in using the products they do and using the services they do, because it says something about themselves and their personalities and their likes and dislikes.
Right. Is there a limit to the amount, to the extent that social media advertising can grow that kind of micro targeting, that personal relationship you were talking about, versus the kind of broad brush, especially on maybe offline type platforms like television or these types of things? I mean, is social media just going to eat everything eventually, or is there an inbuilt limit to it?
Well, it's not just social. I mean, the use of the word social. So let's call it more broadly new media. So it's that stuff outside traditional. I mean, just backtracking a bit. Remember that TV around the world, if the traditional media market is about $500 billion, and the rest of the stuff we do, whether it be in data, public relations, public affairs, digital, branding and identity, healthcare, and all that stuff is another $500 billion. So that's where you get the trillion from. In the traditional 500 billion, 40% of that worldwide, maybe a little bit more, 43, 44%, and for the foreseeable future will be in network linear TV. So the suggestion that television might die is totally misplaced. And the same would apply even to traditional newspapers on a global basis. But some of the things that we've seen in the last few months, and I reference what's been happening in the UK, similar things we see here in the US to traditional newspapers, have called into question the effectiveness of those traditional media. And I think what's happening is the pricing is changing. So let me just give you a specific example. You look at the data here in the US for time spent versus industry investment. The time spent by consumers on newspapers and magazines is 4% of their time, and the industry is still spending, if I remember rightly, about 12% of the budget. So there's a discontinuity that has to change. However, if you look at engagement statistics, virtually any country in the world, and Eric and his team at Kantar, who measure media in 51 countries around the world, can tell you this. If you look at engagement data, for example, the Times newspaper in London, I think on average somebody will spend 40 minutes looking at that newspaper. That's got to be more value to our clients than a 3-second view on Facebook, even if they make it a 7-second view, when 50% of the time the sound is turned off. So the measurement metrics are absolutely critical here.
Right.
You can't compare, apples and oranges. You have to compare data. The data for cross-platform viewership. For example, the debate here about the NFL viewership is down. The National Football League here, the American Football League, is down. Why is that? Well, there's probably a little bit too much of it, to be fair. There have been issues like the San Francisco quarterback raising issues about loyalty, American loyalty, or loyalty to the flag and the anthem. Probably the data understates the audience because they're using different devices. And what we're seeing, in part, it's not the whole explanation, in part, we're seeing that the statistics reflect that. We have to get the measurement devices right, because my view at the end of the day is new media will continue to develop. Digital is 40% of our business. The worldwide weighting is about 28%. We're over-indexed, but we're not over-indexed enough because the market is moving more and more that way. So it's going to keep on going that way, but we have to get the balance right, we have to have better data.
Right.
So that, and then the other thing is this, I think, Jason, that if you look at our stats, Google is still 3-1 to Facebook. Last year it was 4-1. That tells you something about the power of search and the importance of search, and then the increasing importance of programmatic, even the potential increasing importance of dynamic creative, DCOs as they're concerned, they're called, which algorithmically place creative work suited to the target. So I'm married, my wife has just had a baby, I'm interested, goodness knows what reason, in cricket, and I like to ski, and whatever it is. So the creative that I would receive through programmatic would reflect what you know demographically about me and my family, and what I may or may not be interested in. So putting all that together, I think the march of digital will continue, but we have to get the balance right between digital and traditional, and I think there's an imbalance at the moment. As always, stock markets swing too far one way and the other. I think fads in media and trends in media swing too far one way or the other, and we've got to examine engagement data. We've got to examine the basic viewing data. I'll give you another example. We have Twitter data for the UK and Spain, which clearly shows that live television is more powerful and more engaging, and this is through social media, through data from social media, is more powerful and more engaging than we think it is.
Right.
That people are multitasking when they're watching live TV, Britain's Got Talent, The Voice, or whatever it happens to be. So we just have to get the metrics right, because at the moment I think we're making decisions which may be ill-advised.
And so in this room and at this conference, there's lots of maybe smaller startups, very techy. It sounds to me then that you would, if you were to give them advice on their branding, messaging, advertising strategy, it's not to totally give up on non-digital platforms, that there's still value in the traditional media, as you called it. Is that correct?
Yes, but I mean, you just got to look at Google, the market leader. You ought to ask them how much they spend on traditional media. I think the figure is something like $2.5 billion. Their total media budget is $2.5 billion. A lot of that goes on traditional media. And in fact, if you look at, as they try to extend their influence with publishers, one of their bargaining chips is their investment in traditional media. So the answer is no. You must. I mean, you've only got to watch television, look at billboards, listen to the radio, look at all forms of media to see that the new media are probably even more avid users of traditional media than so-called new media. So the startups that we're talking to at Unbound have got to focus on those old media or traditional just as much as we used to.
Right. So a few minutes left here. I want to do some very forward-looking stuff from you. You've been in the industry for a while, and I'm kind of curious. You were mentioning, the WYSI algorithms and all this kind of thing. 50 years from now, what will the ad industry look like? Will it be a Sir Martin Sorrell type at the top, and then just a bunch of AI bots below it, sort of targeting our every secret desire?
Well, I won't be around, so that will not be. That will be not.
We can upload you into the cloud, perhaps. Yeah.
Either from up there or down here, I'll be wrestling with it. The honest answer is I don't know. If I look at our business, the three themes that we're very focused on in terms of. There are four things that we look at. One is called horizontality, which is getting everybody to play together. So one brand, long term, if you're talking about 50 years, if WPP, I think, will be one company in 50 years' time.
Yeah.
What Eric, for example, has done this year with Kantar to create one Kantar, which is 25% of our business. It's $5 billion of revenues out of 20 billion. What he's done, or is in the process of doing with one Kantar, is what in 50 years we will have done with the whole of WPP. So that's one thing. The second area is fast growth markets, which are a third of our business. The next billion consumers over the next 10, 15, 25, 50 years is not going to come from the US and Western Europe. It's going to come from Asia, from Latin America, from Africa, the Middle East, and Central and Eastern Europe. Digital is currently 40% of our business, close to. In 50 years' time, everything will be digital. So digital will have permeated every area of our, and it's not going to be. It's going to be more about voice rather than hands. and it's going to be more about eyes. So it's going to be data, and there's going to be more and more important in our lives. It's 25% now. It'll be more important in our lives. And then lastly, content. It's really critical. So the sort of things that we've done with Vice, the sort of things that we've done with Media Rights Capital, which brought you House of Cards, the sort of things we're doing with Full Screen, with 100 YouTube channels with AT&T and Peter Chernin, the sort of things that we did with AT&T and Dish a week ago, where we bid for NVIDIA in addressable TV. All these things, I would say, one company, digital, permeating everything, data, critically important, and then this subset of technology, data, and content melded together will be absolutely critical. It is highly likely, we've seen things going on even this week. We've seen Accenture pay, what was it, £50 million for a company with £25 million of revenue and 1.3 million pounds of EBITDA. So we've seen it in the creative. So for £50 million, according to Campaign this morning, Accenture has changed its creative image. So you've got it in one. £50 million buys you a new creative reputation. We'll see whether that happens in the longer term, but clearly that sort of thing signals what we've been saying, that mad men or mad women and maths men and maths women, the difference is getting broken down. They're becoming more and more important to one another, and CMOs and CIOs are going to fuse their budgets increasingly over time, and the left brain and the right brain are going to become one brain. So that is all going to be whittled away.
Right, excellent. We got into neuroscience at the end there. We're over time. Thank you very much, Sir Martin, for joining us and doing that sweep of the advertising industry. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, Sir Martin. Thank you.